actually working on a couple of new Nancy Guthrie stories. But in this episode, really, really interesting, I am digging into a couple of things. I'm talking to famed profiler, FBI profiler, Jim Clemente. First of all, he has a really detailed analysis of the blood spatter that was outside Nancy Guthrie's house. An analysis in a way that I haven't seen before, which I think you're going to find really, really interesting, and it really tells a story, he says. Also, what is the suspect or suspects in the Nancy Guthrie case? What are they thinking now? What sort of behavior are they exhibiting now, more than 2 months after the abduction? And how could that help people know what to look for in terms of tracking them down? Jim Clemente always just has such interesting analysis of these kinds of things because of his experience with the FBI as a profiler. I'm talking to him and getting into all of it, and really appreciate it. It's nice to see you. I wanted to start with you because with what you have been looking at with the blood spatter patterns, because I know you went back and analyzed the video that we were able to take up on the front porch area of Nancy's house.
Right.
What stood out to you?
Well, first of all, it was great to actually get the video itself so I could do it frame by frame and then isolate some images because blood spatter evidence, mainly because of the viscosity of blood, the nature of blood, tells us a story. And it is frozen in time. It's a particular moment in time that this happened. But if you look at the first image where there's two distinct blood spatter patterns, um, first of all, there are some very clear indications from that image. And on the one that's more in the center of the screen, you can see some larger droplets of blood and then some smaller droplets of blood. And then to the right of that, you see what looks like a smear pattern. And that is somebody disturbing blood that has already been transplanted onto that surface. So, like I said, it tells a story. But if you then go to, if we kind of, so as an overview, um, these two spatter patterns happen very close in time, right? And they indicate some action that happened in the middle of them. So you can go to the next um, uh, picture. This is an image of a still image of this, a little bit of a close up of that center pattern that we saw in the top of the last screen. And this tells me a number of things, and it's very specific. One is that at this point, Nancy her face was very close to the ground, within a foot of the ground. And this could be either she was on her knees and hunched over, or just hunched over, or actually laying on the ground. But it looks less like she was laying on the ground, but more like hunched over this spot. And the reason I can tell you that is because some of these are low velocity blood spatters, and some are medium velocity blood spatters. We generally categorize them as low, medium, and high. A high velocity blood spatter are very tiny little, almost misty kind of droplets, and that happens only when blood is impacted for example, in a gunshot wound. And but medium velocity can be impacted when it can be created when somebody actually aspirates blood and then coughs it up. And there's two indicators of that here. One is the small size of many of these blood spatters, and the other are at the top of this image. You can see three circular blood spots,
Mm,
but they're hollow. You see mainly the rings, and
yeah.
that's because there was actually air in that blood. There was bubbles, and the bubbles burst, and that's why you see just the ring. Okay, so this definitely came from her. She coughed it out. Those there's very little in terms of directionality in terms of the larger droplets, but the smaller droplets you can see some of them are longitudinal. They're like oblong. So that tells you the direction that the blood was moving when it hit this surface. And not all of them are. And that was caused by the fact that she coughed out this blood, and it kind of went out in a bunch of different directions. So I believe that this shows us a a situation in which Nancy coughed up blood, some of which was sort of had maintained its integrity. Some of it was bubbles that popped, and it's really important to know that this indicates that she was likely within a foot of the ground. Her face, her mouth was within a foot of the ground, probably pointing almost straight down at this point. And so I would assume that that meant that she was either hunched over completely, or she was on her knees and hunched over with her face in this direction. And then, if you see the blood spatter, the larger spatter to the left of this image, there appears to be either a smudge in which someone had interfered with, or after the blood was deposited, touched on that spot and then moved it. And then in the large splotch that is directly to the right of that, a little bit higher, there is a little bit of a tail going to the right. And if you notice in one of the in the middle sort of circular one that had air trapped in it, that it was a bubble, you'll see that there's also sort of a tail that goes to the right. And then the one below that and to the right, you'll see that that also seems to be. So I would say her body was to the left of this image, that's towards the front door,
Mhm.
and her head was facing away from the front door here, but almost straight down. Do you have any questions about that?
The part where it almost looks like blood spray, like
Hmm.
I guess that would make sense from coughing.
Right, that's the medium velocity. The
Yes.
coughing, coughing has pretty high velocity in terms of movement, but it's nowhere near the velocity of, say, a gunshot wound, right? So that's why we call it medium velocity.
The bigger, I guess, I don't know if you'd call them droplets and the ones you're talking about where it looks like an air kind of bubble, but then there's some where they look like kind of normal blood,
Right.
bigger droplets. Do you think
So,
those are also coming from coughing or is that a different injury?
no, I don't think it's a different injury. What I do believe is that it could be, it's just, it dripped out. So she may have coughed and then more dripped out afterwards. That's what it appears to be to me. And then if you go to the next image, which is directly to in that first image, it was directly to the right of that first image.
Okay.
And as you can see, the doormat is to the left of this image. There are some more captures of droplets of blood and then bubbles of blood. And you can see them in the top center. You have two droplets of blood and one bubble. And then in the bottom, to slightly to the left, you'll see one droplet and then one bubble. And then to the right side of it, you'll see a couple more bubbles. And then you see a smear pattern. And that is because the blood that was deposited there was then interfered with. Someone may have stepped on it, someone may have their hand or another body part may have contacted it and smeared it there. So I think if we go back to the first image that we were talking about, this tells a story of a snippet of time. And that is that at this point in time, that there's the highest likelihood is that she was either down on her knees or hunched over completely with her face very close to the ground and coughing out this blood. And then after that, where the blood pattern then disappears, I believe that she was likely picked up and carried the rest of the way, perhaps with her face up, so that there was no more blood deposited on that walkway. So, Brian, have you been able to confirm whether or not there was actually blood spatter patterns inside the house?
What I've been told is no, that the only blood is what we see outside the front door. There have been some other reports from other journalists that they're saying they have a source that there is blood right inside the door, like you see
Hmm.
outside. But my source said no, like that's not the case. It's just outside. So that's what
Okay,
I've been
well,
going with.
if there is blood spatter patterns on the inside of the door, that would indicate to me that she was, because of what Savannah told us, that her mother was taken out of her bed at night, right? I believe that she was threatened. She was controlled by most likely the gun that the offender had at his waist or his crotch area, and that he used the gun to threaten her, control her, and get her down to the front door. At that point, or shortly thereafter, she realized he was trying to take her out of the house. And like we definitely tell people, if an offender is trying to take you away from a location, he's trying to take you to a location where he has more privacy and control. And that never bodes well for the victim. That if an offender is trying to take you away from a location, then fight for your life with your life, because that's how dramatically your chances of survival diminish if someone is taking you away from a place where you were secure. So I believe that Nancy fought him either inside the door or just outside the door, depending on whether the first appearance of this blood spatter evidence is. And at that point, she was likely either blitzed with overwhelming force, punched in the face or the nose, and she began bleeding, and she went down either on her knees or just hunched over and then coughed up this blood, which is why we see this pattern. I think at that point, she was likely picked up by the offender, he or she having stepped in and smeared, or another body part of hers touching the blood that she had coughed up already, and smearing in the patterns that we see here. And then from that point forward, she was carried to whatever vehicle he had. And at that point, she was likely turned with her face up so that we see no further blood dripping from the face wounds that likely caused this pattern.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said. And I think last time you and I talked, then we talked once the recording was over. And you mentioned talked about, if someone tries to take you and put you in a car, should you ever get in? And I was saying, well, maybe you get in and then try to negotiate. You said, no, you never. I mean, obviously with Nancy, she's an older woman. She didn't
Right.
probably have much control, but you're saying like for people watching you fight to not get in the car, basically.
Right. I mean, it's rare, but when, for example, it happened just the other day, a young girl was, I think, walking home from school or waiting at her bus stop, and a man came up in a van, got behind her, put a gun to her back, and ordered her into the van. Luckily, other students saw this happen and called the police. The guy took her in the van and went to a gas station, and for whatever reason brought her inside, and she mouthed the words "help me" to the clerk. The clerk got in between her and him and got him out of the store just as the police were arriving, and he was arrested. Now that is a very rare set of circumstances. If there are people who witness you being taken away and can identify the offender, the license plate, whatever it is, you might have a larger chance of survival. But the fact that an offender is taking you to a place where they have more privacy and control, they literally are bringing you to a place where they have connections, and either they've been there before to surveil it, or this is someplace under their control. And both of those things mean that they might not want you to survive to be able to tell what happened and where it happened. So the the best thing to do is use all your personal weapons, and that is biting someone, poking their eyes, ripping their ears off, whatever you have to do, kick them in the groin area. Whatever you have to do, scream and scratch and fight to do everything possible to not being taken into a place where they have more custody and control of you.
He didn't just leave clues. He left a story written in blood. On the night Nancy Guthrie vanished, investigators found something chilling right outside her front door. Not just blood, but a pattern. And according to former FBI profiler Jim Clemente, that pattern may reveal exactly what happened in her final moments at home. The droplets weren't random. Some were large, others were tiny, almost mist-like, but the most disturbing detail, hollow rings. That only happens when blood is mixed with air. Meaning Nancy wasn't just bleeding, she was coughing. Her face, Clemente believes, was less than a foot from the ground, either on her knees or hunched over, struggling to breathe. That's when it hit, a violent moment that changed everything. This wasn't a quiet abduction. This was a fight. Investigators believe the attacker forced Nancy out of her home, likely at gunpoint. But somewhere near the front door, something went wrong. Maybe she resisted. Maybe she realized she wasn't coming back. And that's when the violence escalated. The blood suggests she was struck possibly in the face. The coughing followed. Then suddenly it stops. No trail, no drops leading away. Which leads to one terrifying conclusion. She was carried. Whoever took her didn't let her walk out. They picked her up and disappeared into the night. But here, where it gets even more disturbing. If this was planned, why did it unravel so quickly? And if the attacker wanted money, why did they stop communicating? Because according to Clemente, what happened next may be the darkest part of this entire case.
Do you think that there was more than, I mean, you've said before you thought this was one person. Do you still believe that, or do you think there may have been more?
Yeah, I think this actually indicates to me a single actor because we don't see multiple steps through this blood spatter evidence. And if there were two people, let's say, you would think that one of them would have had control of her, complete control of her inside the house and brought her outside and would not have lost that control. But here she's clearly on the ground, coughing this blood up. And I believe if this is the only place where there's blood, this must be where she was attacked. And that must mean that she had just fought him at that point, and that was used to then control her. And then from that point, she was then lifted and taken away, which is why you don't see any other blood spatter evidence.
What does it say about the person that they would hurt an older 84-year-old woman like that? And maybe I'm just naive because I don't know. All of this is hard for me to wrap my mind around, like
Right,
punching an old lady, but to me,
right.
I'd have a much easier time like punching you and hurting you. The
Thank you.
thought of like doing that to an old woman is like, I can't even imagine. I'd rather just run away and abandon the whole plan, you know?
Right. Well, it just tells you a little bit more about his motivation, that there was a goal in mind and he was going to do whatever it took to accomplish that goal. And here it appears that that goal had to do with getting Nancy out of her home in the middle of the night. What else he planned on doing, we have no idea. Now, this goes back to the whole ransom note issue. If one or more of those ransom notes was real, and if it wasn't used just as a decoy, a distraction to throw the family and then law enforcement off, then money was obviously one of his goals. And in order to get that money, he would have to take her and have control of her and then threaten her life and then try to get the money. But the fact is that clearly that didn't actually happen in these circumstances. And probably that was because he was not as prepared or as capable criminally as he thought he was. And I think some of that comes out in having a very unique backpack, which is only purchased or sold at Walmart's, having a backpack that had bright reflective straps on it, so that he'd be easier to see, and having a face mask that allowed him to breathe and to lose hairs and to distribute his DNA wherever he went, as opposed to having a surgical mask, which would have covered that and prevented a lot of that from happening. So there are things that he did that he thought were sophisticated, but they were not criminally sophisticated, in fact.
You mentioned the ransom notes. Savannah said that she believes two of them were possibly legit. And we
Hmm.
learned just in the last week from, those two went to the local TV stations in Arizona.
Right.
Learned from one of those TV stations, and there was the Bitcoin account attached to it. And you
Hmm.
could look in the Bitcoin account, and they're now saying that there was a transaction on February 10th where someone put some money into the account, presumably the Guthrie family or FBI, a small amount, and there was a note. And I wrote down what the note said. It said, "We are ready to talk. Contact us." Uh,
Hmm.
and we didn't really know that before. And then there was no activity after that. So
Right.
what do you think that means? Because if the motivation was money and now you've got the Guthrie family establishing contact, but then no response.
Unfortunately, Brian, I think that perhaps she passed away in that time frame. Yeah. That he realized that he no longer had what they wanted, um, and probably then cut off all communication. He also may have. See, I told you before. I believe that the offender showed what was important to him in his actions, and he sent this note, these two ransom notes, to the media. Generally, that is the opposite of what kidnappers want to do. They don't want the media involved because the media being involved means that the police will also be involved immediately. And that is something that really distinguishes this case from most other kidnapping cases that we've seen. And that is the secrecy element helps them in terms of getting paid and getting away. The most vulnerable point is usually the point of exchange, where the person is traded for the money. And Bitcoin actually helps prevent that vulnerable point for the offender. So he could have actually done that, collected the money, and then disappeared. But for whatever reason, I believe they may have gotten nervous about the the situation because of that communication. I don't know. I'm sure that the communication was made to try to sort of get them to communicate, and then in that communication to get more information from them and to verify, to get proof of life, things like that. So it's a very it's just a tragic set of circumstances that he never replied to um, that communication from the Guthries. But like I said, I think it indicates that something really bad happened at that point.
What do you think is going through, I say his, I mean, we're assuming it's a man, mind now,
Well, I'm pretty
months
sure
later.
that was a man we saw in the video,
Yeah,
and I would be pretty confident saying that I just don't see any evidence of other people involved. Now, could there be other people involved? Sure. Could they have been involved and not at the scene? Sure. But there's no evidence to me that there are more than one offenders here. For example, if there's three different shoe print patterns in the blood stains,
right.
spatters, that would tell me that something. But they may get two different kinds of DNA from the house that seem to be associated. But I just don't see that. I'm not aware of any of that evidence. So I would withhold any judgment about whether there were more than just the one person we knew. But what is going through his mind is likely, did I actually get away with this? Was I able to permanently conceal her body? And will there be any way that they won't be able to tie it to me? I think knowing and I would say absolutely watching every bit of coverage that there is on this case, perhaps even talking to people about it to try to find out more information, or even setting up an alibi with other people. In other words, that he was somewhere else and could not have been involved, those kinds of things. But I do believe that he likely has done or is doing everything he can to change his appearance, to change the appearance of his car, whatever vehicle he used, maybe get rid of it, sell it like Rex Heuermann did, um, get get as much distance between himself and this crime scene as possible, and also as much distance between himself and the victim as possible. So leaving town for an emergency, staying away for a period of time until everything calms down. But I firmly believe that the mistakes that this offender made during the course of committing this crime and afterwards, and even before actually committing the crime in the pre-attack surveillance that appears to have happened, that he will be caught because of that. And it may be DNA through forensic genetic genealogy. It may be because somebody notices his behavioral changes. It may be because he leaked out information before and after these events that are going to tip somebody off and they're going to call law enforcement.
If he's more of an amateur, as you say, and because he made these mistakes, does that mean he would be more paranoid now, less
I believe
confident?
so. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
interesting.
Because, and that's why he would try to change as much as he can to create not only distance but appearance differences, so that, and that could be to himself and as well to his vehicle.
And there's been some concern. I mean, the sheriff has said, we have concern the person could do this again, but it sounds like based on your profile, at least to me, that's probably not likely.
Hmm. I would say that I don't see really any indication that he's done this before, and therefore I don't see any indication that he'd do it again. However, this could be because we generally see in serial offenders, we generally see an escalation from precursor crimes. For example, in this kind of case, those precursor crimes would be peeping and burglaries. And then maybe this was the first time he escalated to actual abduction. But it's very difficult to know that from the amount of information we have. I mean, I would love to know all the information from the crime scene. I think it would be much easier to make that determination then. But I do believe that his motivation was strong, that he carried this out even despite the fact that at some point she did not actually cooperate, and but he was able to control her after that, before and after that uh, incident where she most likely stood up to him and tried to fight him or refused to go any further. And I think that it could be, in terms of motivations, that strong motivation could have its basis in a few different things. One could be basically this financial reason, and that could be enough. That could be the sole reason. And if that's the case, generally that's either because he was aware of her connection to Savannah and thought that this family has a lot of money, or because of the location of the house, that this house indicated the family has a lot of money. But he must have engaged in either pre attack surveillance, or he had some contact with this family in the last months or years, in which he determined that Nancy lived alone and was vulnerable, and because of her daughter, that she the daughter would be willing to pay significantly for the return of her mother.
Yeah, it seems, financial motivation makes the most sense, but I did wonder when we learned that this person never responded in the Bitcoin account when the Guthries, it seems like, reached out. It made me wonder, could the person be wanting to like torture them in a way, like mentally, like by not
Yes, well,
responding?
that's the other motive, which is a potential stalking motive. In other words, generally people who engage in stalking have some fantasy that they've built up in their mind that this person that they're fixated on should be with them and should listen to them and should pay attention to them. And when they don't get that kind of reaction from the person, then they, can escalate. And this could be an escalation to get the attention of Nancy. Excuse me. The This could be an escalation to get the attention of Savannah, and it certainly did accomplish that goal because Savannah made direct pleas to the abductor and 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 was listening to the abductor at that point. And so that in and of itself could have accomplished, seeing the pain and suffering in Savannah's face, that could have accomplished what this offender had wanted to do, because he may have gotten angry about her not paying him attention, even if he never actually reached out to her and the fantasy was all in his mind. That could be what motivated this. It could also be that he had some tangential connection through working on the house, the pool, the yard, or delivering, or even Ubering or lifting Nancy. All of those interactions could have innocently given him information that he then used to pull off this crime.
And you mentioned like Savannah's emotions. I mean, just because you work with so many victims too, I've wondered the her just being in this limbo, not knowing what happened to her mom, not knowing who's responsible, not knowing whether that person could be a danger to her and her family. How do victims like deal with that? How have you told people to cope with that? Because at least, I mean, if her mom was found and it was awful and sad, and her mom was at least, I guess there's some kind of resolution. But when there's not, I mean, she's gone back to work. How do you do that?
It's extremely difficult, and I've been amazed over the course of my career at the strength and resilience of some of the surviving family members, just being able to go on and on. And unfortunately, sometimes it's years or decades before anything is resolved, anything is known. Some of these families really suffer the entire time. Other people get into advocating and trying to protect people from this kind of crime. And I've seen it where 20, 30, 40 years later, the case is actually resolved because of increases in technology and or someone in a deathbed confession, or someone who no longer is afraid of the offender comes forward and gives information. And the only hope is, hopefully for this family, is that one, they talk to victim services, get counseling, because this is a very, very difficult and very traumatic experience. And it's the only way, I think, for them to actually move forward without just completely falling apart.
When you're on the law enforcement side, this is something else I've wondered with Savannah. Like, at what point she may get frustrated with investigators. I mean, because she's kind of an insider in a way. She's a lawyer. She worked at Court TV. She's covered a lot of crime. Like, she may be critical of them and the fact that this isn't solved. Does it ever get adversarial or awkward when you're on the law enforcement side and the victims aren't, getting the answers that they need?
Sure, that can happen, but professional law enforcement will overlook that and continue to do their jobs and continue to cooperate and communicate with the family despite what their reactions might be. I think uh, in the Colonial Parkway murders, for example, there was a long time when that's in Virginia, a case in Virginia where there's a number of different couples that were murdered along the Colonial Parkway. And those cases have slowly been solved through DNA. And it's been decades since the crimes occurred. But only recently, another one of those couples that were murdered by the same guy. It was proven to be connected to the other murders. So, but during that time frame, there was a lot of angst and anxiety expressed by family members because of the time delay. And especially after some of the crimes were solved and the others weren't, there was a lot of anger. Well, why isn't my case, being solved? But in the end,
At first, it looked like a kidnapping for money. Ransom messages, a Bitcoin account, even a response from the family of Nancy Guthrie saying they were ready to talk. And then silence. No reply, no proof of life, nothing. To Jim Clement, that silence speaks volumes. Because in cases like this, when the money stops mattering, it usually means one thing. The victim is already gone. Clement believes the suspect didn't plan for things to go this way. The attack outside the house, the blood, the struggle, it suggests something went wrong. Fast. This wasn't a clean, calculated crime. It was messy, emotional, panicked. And the person behind it, likely not a seasoned criminal. In fact, Clement says the suspect made critical mistakes, wearing identifiable gear, possibly leaving DNA, even drawing attention by contacting the media instead of staying hidden. That's not how professionals operate. That's how amateurs slip up. But here, the chilling part. Even amateurs can disappear. Right now, the person responsible could be watching everything, following the news, listening to discussions, wondering if they've gotten away with it. Or worse, trying to act normal. Changing their appearance, laying low, waiting for the case to go cold. But cases like this don't just fade away. Because all it takes is one mistake, one tip, one piece of DNA. And everything unravels. The question is, will that moment come in time to finally answer the one thing everyone still wants to know?
you know, law enforcement professionalism should rule the day from that side of the house, no matter what the victims' families are saying or doing or going through, because our job in law enforcement is to find justice and not get involved in emotional or, um, you know, let's say any kind of um, retributional inaction. They
Mm.
should be working as hard as they can until the case is solved.
We've reported that nothing was taken from inside the house. There was no sign of an assault or struggle in the house. I'm curious what you think about that. And then also that we learned that the back door was propped open.
Mhm.
What does that mean?
All right. Well, I'll address the nothing was taken. The fact that nothing was taken from the house indicates that the motive was not burglary. That this is not a burglary gone bad. This is a directed, motivated abduction of an elderly woman, and an elderly woman who has connections to someone who's famous, and that may be the entire motive. It appears that with these two letters, at least being believed to be authentic, these two ransom notes, that there is also a motive that is financial, which would be, very, very common in this kind of a case. Somebody's taken and they want money to let the person go. The fact that the rear doors were propped open could mean that the offender entered through those doors and wanted to make sure that if he needed to make a very quick exit, that the doors were open and he could just run out in a direction that he has already planned would be the safest way for him to get out. Um, it could mean that he planned on taking her out the back door, but it really doesn't make much sense that he would then take her out the front door when there's a door and a gate. It's If the back door was propped open, it does it does tell me that that was his plan to go through the front door. That must be where he had better access to the vehicle. But I don't see. Some people have indicated that they thought that was an indication of multiple offenders, but again, I just don't see any evidence of that.
Really, really appreciate Jim for taking the time to talk with me. Really appreciate you guys for following along and for subscribing. Again, kind of working on a couple of things that I'm going to have more on soon. That's why I'm in the airport right now, but I'll keep you guys posted. Thank you for subscribing, and I'll talk to you guys later.